Johnny Tremain, Chapter 11, Part 5. Before we read, here are 3 questions to guide your thoughts. 1. What is Johnny's plan to escape Boston? 2. What deal does Johnny strike with Mrs. Bessie? And 3. What is to become of Goblin and the Lornes? That would be the Lorne family. Part 5. Johnny almost forgot the principal reason for his visit to the lights. He would have liked to sit quietly for a moment, brood over what Miss Lavinia had told him. Now was not the time to brood. Scylla and Mrs. Bessie came back together. He told them he must have Pumpkin's uniform. Mrs. Bessie said he was not to think of such a thing. If they catch you, Johnny, they will shoot you for impersonating a British soldier in wartime. Lots of better men got shot today. Lexington, Concord. The British are sending boats back and forth tonight, taking off their men from Charlestown. I can sneak along over with them. No, I forbid you, Johnny. You're going to stay right here and help Scylla and me look after this house. I've got to go. Who's going to look out for the light horses if you walk out on us? General Gage has given his word no person or horse or any household gear will be touched, and we need a man to mind the stable. Johnny had an idea. Scylla, there is a thing you can do for me. What? Go to the Afric Queen and get my goblin. Take him up here and turn him out to pasture with the light horses. I guess he won't mind being a Tory for a while. Can I ride him? Yes, if you don't mind falling off. I don't mind. She looked excited and pleased. Mrs. Bessie shook her head. And who's to care for the animals? You adding your goblin makes things worse, not better, for us 2 women folk. The coachman's going with the lights? Of course, he's English born. Look here, Mr. Lorne, the printer. He's not what you'd call a coachman, but he was reared on a farm, and he's in trouble. The British haven't arrested him yet. He hid in a feather bed, but he can't stay there until we've driven the British out of Boston. Couldn't he and his wife and child move up here into the coachman's quarters, and you sort of act as though he had always worked here? Of course they could. I'd be proud to have them. Scylla, just as soon as the Unicorn sails, you go to the Lornes and tell them to come right up and settle in. The girl nodded. Johnny said, if he can get his little press to working again, I think he might like to bring that with him. Go on with his sedition, as they call it. He just about has to print. We can hide his press, too. Nobody would dare hunt here for sedition, not after what Gage promised. He'll be a very happy man, and I know I've got to go. Syl, where's that uniform of Pumpkin's? I hid it under my bed. I'll fetch it down. Mrs. Bessie shook her head, but she wasn't going to argue any more. How old are you, Johnny? She asked. 16. And what's that? A boy or a man? He laughed. A boy in a time of peace, and a man in a time of war. Well, men have got the right to risk their lives for things they think worth it. God go with you, my young man. But if they shoot you, remember, I warned you. I'll remember all right. Pumpkin had been a little stouter than Johnny. The uniform went on easily over the boy's breeches and jacket. Mrs. Bessie braided his hair for him and tied it tightly as the British regular wore theirs. You couldn't say, could you? Scylla asked him, why it is you have to get out tonight? Yes, Dr. Warren told me so. Told me things to watch for and report on to him. I've got to find him. And Rab. Rab? The girl's voice sounded frightened. He was with the Lexington men. They stood up at dawn, and the regulars killed quite a few of them. Oh, but Rab? Johnny did not answer immediately. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and Mrs. Bessie was still fussing with his hair. Not once since Dr. Warren had left had he spoken his name. He hadn't dared to let himself begin to think about him. If he did, he knew he could not think of anything else. Now he had spoken his name, and emotions, fears that he had held in check all day surged up through him. But he said quietly, "I've got to find him. So be a good girl, Syl, and mind Mrs. Bessie." He stood up and put on a shiny black hat with a silver cockade on it and saluted smartly. He knew that the last man to wear this uniform had been shot for putting it off, and there was a chance he'd get shot for putting it on. The scarlet tunic, with its pale blue facings, the white crossbands on its chest, the white breeches, made him feel like a different person. Now he was a private of the King's Own. He felt confident and happy. And Rab? Of course he was all right. You couldn't kill a fellow like Rab with just a handful of bullets. He shook hands with Mrs. Bessie, and, because his uniform made him feel grown up, he kissed Scylla goodbye, just as he had the Sunday before seen Rab kiss his aunt. Not at all like a child being kissed by female relatives. But Scylla said mischievously, "Why, I feel as if I were kissing Pumpkin." So Johnny stalked off down Beacon Hill, with the proper martial strut. The littler they are, he thought, the more they strut. The physical act of strutting lifted his spirits, made him feel bigger than he was. Of course, that was why the little fellows do it. And he wondered what had happened to Sergeant Gale.